The pill slipped from my husband's fingers like a snowflake falling into champagne. I watched it happen in slow motion, Gerald's manicured hand hovering over my glass, the tiny white capsule tumbling through the golden liquid, dissolving before it hit bottom. Around us, 50 colleagues applauded my 35 years of service, their faces glowing under string lights and burgundy balloons. The retirement cake stood 3 layers tall, my name spelled out in elegant cursive frosting. But all I could see was that moment of betrayal floating in my drink. My name is Claudine Mercer, and I just caught my husband trying to poison me at my own party. The smart thing would have been to scream. To knock the glass from the table and point an accusing finger at the man I'd shared a bed with for 28 years. Instead, something cold and calculating took over, a survival instinct I didn't know I possessed. I smiled, set my glass down next to his, adjusted them both as if making room for the cheese platter, switching them so smoothly that even I wasn't sure it had happened. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family, enjoy the story. Then I lifted Gerald's glass, the one meant for him, and raised it high for the toast. To new beginnings, I said, my voice steady as granite. Gerald's face went pale. His eyes darted between my hand and the table, searching for his original glass like a man who'd lost his keys. But it was too late. I was already drinking from what should have been his safety net, and he was stuck holding the weapon he'd prepared for me. The crowd cheered. Cameras flashed. My boss, Patricia, squeezed my shoulder and whispered about how much they'd miss me. But beneath the celebration, I felt the ground shifting under my feet like quicksand. This wasn't a moment of jealousy or a crime of passion. Gerald had come prepared. He'd planned this. At my retirement party, the one night in my life when I was supposed to be honored, celebrated, remembered, he'd tried to erase me. The rest of the evening blurred into a nightmare of forced smiles and small talk. Colleagues hugged me goodbye, promising to stay in touch. The maintenance crew stacked chairs while I posed for final photos. Gerald barely spoke, his jaw clenched tight as a vice. When we finally got home, I went straight to the kitchen and set my glass on the counter under the harsh fluorescent light. That's when I saw it, a tiny fragment of white powder clinging to the rim, barely visible unless you knew what to look for. Evidence. Proof that the man sleeping in my bed had just tried to drug me. I stood there in my stockings, still wearing my retirement corsage, staring at that glass like it held the answer to a riddle I'd been too blind to solve. How long had Gerald been planning this? What was in that pill? And more terrifying than anything else, what would have happened if I hadn't been watching? The refrigerator hummed in the darkness. My perfume still clung to my dress, sweet and cloying now like funeral flowers. Somewhere down the hall, Gerald was probably lying awake too, wondering if his plan had worked. But I had the glass. I had the evidence. And for the first time in 28 years of marriage, I had something Gerald didn't know about. The question was, what was I going to do with it? If you were Claudine and caught that moment, what would you do first? Comment below and tell me. My coffee cup trembled against the kitchen table at 6 in the morning. I hadn't slept. Every creak of the house made me jump. Every shadow in the hallway looked like Gerald creeping toward me with another pill, another plan. The glass sat exactly where I'd left it, that white residue still clinging to the rim like damning evidence in a crime scene. But was it really evidence? Or was I losing my mind? The morning light made everything feel surreal. Maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe Gerald had just been adjusting napkins, and my paranoid brain had conjured up a murder plot where none existed. After all, this was the same man who brought me coffee in bed on Sundays, who still opened car doors for me in restaurant parking lots. Then I remembered his face when I switched the glasses. The terror. The way his hand froze halfway to his mouth. No. I hadn't imagined anything. I started replaying our marriage like a movie reel, searching for clues I'd missed. 28 years of shared dinners, family vacations, and Christmas mornings. But now every memory felt tainted, like looking at old photographs through dirty glass. There was the time he'd insisted I take those sleeping pills after my mother's funeral, even though I said I didn't need them. The way he'd started managing our finances alone, claiming it was one less thing for me to worry about. How he'd dismissed my concerns about retiring early, saying the pension would be more than enough for both of us. Both of us. As if he'd already calculated his share. My hands steadied as anger replaced fear. I wasn't going crazy. I was waking up. I found Gerald in his home office at 7:30, pecking at his laptop with unusual urgency. He looked up when I knocked, his smile too bright for a man who'd barely slept. "Morning, sweetheart. How are you feeling?" How was I feeling? Like I'd dodged a bullet in my own home. "Fine," I said. "Just tired." He nodded sympathetically. "Big night. Lots of excitement." His eyes searched my face like he was looking for symptoms. "Maybe you should rest today. Take it easy." I agreed and left him to his typing. But instead of resting, I went straight to our bedroom and started searching. If Gerald was planning something, there would be traces. Men like him, methodical, careful, they didn't act on impulse. They planned. I started with his dresser drawers, running my hands along the bottoms and sides. Nothing. His closet revealed only pressed shirts and organized ties. But in the pocket of his gray wool coat, the one he'd worn to dinner last week, I found a crumpled business card. Harrison and Associates. Estate planning. Why would Gerald need an estate planning lawyer? We'd done our wills years ago. My pulse quickened as I smoothed out the card. There was a handwritten note on the back: discuss pension transfer options. Call after June 15th. June 15th. 3 days after my retirement party. The timing wasn't coincidence. It was strategy. I slipped the card into my pajama pocket and continued searching. In Gerald's bedside drawer, I found a small notebook tucked behind his reading glasses. Most pages were blank, but 3 were filled with his careful handwriting. Review insurance beneficiaries. Update before July. Contact Harold about property deed. Check on power of attorney forms. Need signature. Power of attorney forms. The words sent ice through my veins. Gerald wanted legal control over my decisions, my money, my life. And he needed my signature to get it. That's when I realized the pill wasn't meant to kill me. It was meant to make me compliant. Confused. Easy to manipulate into signing documents I'd never agree to while clear-headed. I was holding the notebook when Gerald appeared in the doorway. "Looking for something?" he asked, his voice casual but his eyes sharp. My throat went dry. "Just organizing. You know how retirement is. Time to clean house." He stepped into the room, moving closer than felt comfortable. "Find anything interesting?" The notebook felt like it was burning a hole in my hand. Just old receipts and things. Gerald's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Well, let me know if you need help with anything. I'm here for you, sweetheart. Always." The word always sounded like a threat. After he left, I sat on our bed holding that notebook and feeling the walls close in around me. Gerald wasn't just cheating on our marriage. He was planning to steal my future. And I was the only one who knew. I needed help. Real help. Someone who understood legal documents and dirty tricks and men who smiled while they plotted. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in 3 years. Miriam Holt, attorney at law. "Miriam, it's Claudine Mercer. I need to see you. Today." And Miriam. My voice cracked. "I think my husband is trying to destroy me." The line went quiet for a heartbeat. Then Miriam's voice came back, sharp and focused. "Don't say another word over the phone. Come to my office at 2 o'clock. And Claudine? Bring everything." I hung up and stared at Gerald's notebook, at the business card, at the glass still sitting downstairs with its white residue. Everything. I'd bring everything. But first, I needed to find out what else Gerald was hiding. Because if he'd been planning this since before my retirement, there had to be more. I walked to his office door and listened. The typing had stopped. Gerald was on the phone, his voice low and urgent. "No, she doesn't suspect anything yet. But we need to move faster than planned." My blood turned to ice water. Would you snoop for proof, or confront the person who betrayed you? Vote in the comments. The folder with my name on it sat in Gerald's locked drawer like a loaded gun. I'd found his spare key taped under his desk. Typical Gerald, always having backups for his backups. My hands shook as I turned the lock, knowing that whatever was inside would change everything. The folder was thick. Too thick for a woman who'd supposedly signed only basic documents over the years. I spread the contents across our kitchen table under the morning sun, and my world tilted sideways. A revised will naming Gerald as sole beneficiary of my pension. A power of attorney form with my signature, except I'd never signed it. Bank transfer authorizations for amounts that made my stomach drop. And worst of all, a life insurance policy I'd never seen before, with a death benefit that would make Gerald rich. Each document looked official, professional. But the signatures. Something was wrong with the signatures. I pulled out a magnifying glass from our junk drawer and studied my supposed handwriting under the light. The C in Claudine looked right. The loops in my E's matched my style. But there was something mechanical about them, like someone had traced my name very, very carefully. Then I saw it, in the insurance document. Whoever forged my signature had hesitated on the final R in Mercer. The pen line was slightly thicker, like they'd paused to remember how I finished that letter. Gerald had been practicing my signature. For months, maybe years. I photographed everything with my phone, my hands steadier now that shock was giving way to fury. How long had he been planning this? How many quiet evenings had he spent in this office, perfecting my handwriting while I watched television in the next room? The timestamps on the documents told their own story. The will revision was dated 2 months ago. The power of attorney form showed last month. The insurance policy was dated just last week, 3 days before my retirement party. Gerald hadn't just planned to drug me. He'd been setting up my financial murder for months. I was sliding the documents back into their folder when I heard his car in the driveway. My heart hammered against my ribs as I locked the drawer and replaced the key, smoothing everything back to normal just as his footsteps hit the front porch. "Honey, I'm back," Gerald called out, his voice cheerful and loving. "Got your favorite bagels from Sherman's." Sherman's Bakery. The same place we'd gone for breakfast on our first anniversary. He was still playing the devoted husband, even while planning my destruction. "Be right there," I called back, forcing brightness into my voice. At Miriam's office that afternoon, I laid out everything like evidence at a crime scene. The photographs, the business card, the notebook, even the glass with its telltale residue. Miriam Holt had been my mentee once, a sharp young paralegal I'd helped navigate office politics 15 years ago. Now she was a partner in her own firm, specializing in elder law and financial abuse cases. Her dark hair was streaked with silver, and her eyes were harder than I remembered, like she'd seen too much of what people could do to each other. She studied the documents in silence, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. When she looked up, her expression was grim. "Claudine, this is sophisticated. Whoever helped Gerald with these documents knows what they're doing. The forgeries are good, not perfect, but good enough to fool most people." "Helped him?" My voice cracked. You mean he didn't do this alone? No way. Look at the legal language, the document structure. Gerald had professional help. Probably from someone who specializes in this kind of thing. She tapped her pen against the desk. We need to prove these signatures are forged, and we need to do it fast. Miriam picked up her phone and dialed a number from memory. Dr. Rao? It's Miriam Holt. I need your help with a handwriting analysis. Emergency basis. Yes, I'll pay the rush fee. She hung up and turned back to me. Dr. Nikhil Rao. He's a forensic document examiner, one of the best in the state. If these signatures are forged, he'll prove it. And if they're not? Miriam's smile was sharp as a blade. Oh, they're forged. I've been doing this for 20 years, Claudine. I know a setup when I see one. An hour later, Dr. Rao arrived at the office with a briefcase full of equipment that looked like something from a science fiction movie. He was a slight man with gentle hands and keen eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Mrs. Mercer, he said, spreading my documents under a high-powered lamp, I'll need samples of your genuine handwriting. As many as possible, from different time periods. I'd brought everything I could think of, old birthday cards, shopping lists, even the guest book from my retirement party. Dr. Rao compared them to the forged signatures with tools I couldn't pronounce, measuring angles and pressure points like a detective solving a murder. After 2 hours, he looked up with a satisfied expression. These are definitely forged, he announced. Skilled forgeries, but forgeries nonetheless. Whoever did this used a light table and traced your genuine signatures, but they couldn't replicate the natural flow of your handwriting. See these hesitation marks? These pressure variations? No one writes their own name like this. Relief flooded through me so powerfully I had to sit down. There's more, Dr. Rao continued, pulling up something on his laptop. The metadata on these scanned documents has been altered. According to the file properties, you signed the power of attorney form on March 15th. But look, he pointed to the screen. The original creation date shows it was actually scanned last Tuesday, 3 days before your retirement party. Miriam leaned forward. Can you prove that in court? Absolutely. Metadata doesn't lie, even when people do. As Dr. Rao packed up his equipment, Miriam walked me to the parking garage. Claudine, we need to move fast. Gerald clearly has a timeline, and your retirement was just the starting gun. We'll file for an emergency injunction first thing tomorrow, freeze all your assets until this gets sorted out. What if he finds out what we're doing? Miriam's expression hardened. Then we'd better hope we're faster than he is. I drove home through the evening traffic, my mind racing. Gerald was already there when I pulled into our driveway, sitting at the kitchen table with takeout containers from our favorite Chinese restaurant. Thought I'd surprise you, he said, standing to kiss my cheek. Kung Pao chicken and fried rice. Just like old times. Just like old times. Before I knew he was a liar and a forger and a man who drugged his wife's drinks. That's sweet, I managed, forcing a smile. As we ate dinner, Gerald chattered about his day, about plans for our retirement together, about how excited he was for our new chapter. Every word felt like poison in my ears. By the way, he said casually, cutting into his chicken, I set up an appointment with Harold Morrison tomorrow. You remember Harold? My old golf buddy who became a financial advisor? He wants to help us optimize our retirement accounts. Harold Morrison. I'd heard that name recently, but I couldn't place where. What kind of optimization? I asked. Gerald's smile was warm and loving and completely false. Oh, just boring paperwork stuff. Making sure everything's organized properly. You know how these things can get complicated. That's when I remembered where I'd heard Harold's name. It was in Gerald's notebook, scribbled in his careful handwriting, "Contact Harold about property deed." Gerald wasn't just planning to steal my money. He was planning to steal everything. And tomorrow, he wanted me to sign the papers that would make it legal. I excused myself to use the bathroom and immediately texted Miriam, "He's moving tomorrow. Harold Morrison. Financial advisor. Help." Her response came back in seconds, "Don't sign anything. We file injunction at 8 a.m. I returned to the table and smiled at my husband, this stranger I'd shared a life with for 28 years. "Tomorrow sounds perfect," I said, taking a bite of rice that tasted like cardboard. "I can't wait." But Gerald's eyes were watching me too carefully, like he was looking for something. And when I reached for my water glass, he said quietly, "You seem different tonight, sweetheart. Are you feeling all right?" The question hung in the air between us like a challenge. Do you think this was planned for months or just a cowardly impulse? Share your take. The bank statement in Gerald's briefcase showed a wire transfer scheduled for tomorrow afternoon, the exact amount of my pension. I found it at 3 in the morning while he slept, driven by insomnia and the desperate need to know how deep this betrayal went. Gerald had always been a sound sleeper, but I still crept through the house like a burglar in my own home. His briefcase sat on the kitchen counter, unlocked, either from carelessness or because he never imagined I'd have the courage to look. Inside were documents that made my blood run cold. Transfer authorizations, account closure forms, and a printed email exchange between Gerald and someone named Elliot Price that laid out their plan in devastating detail. Gerald, confirming our discussion. "Once C signs power of attorney tomorrow, we can execute the transfers immediately. Offshore account is ready. Timeline critical due to cooling off periods." Elliot. Gerald's response was even worse. "Understood. She won't be a problem much longer. The retirement timing worked perfectly. She trusts me completely now. Won't be a problem much longer." Like I was an obstacle to be removed, not a wife of 28 years. I photographed everything with shaking hands, my phone's camera flash seeming loud as gunshots in the quiet kitchen. But it was Gerald's final email that nearly stopped my heart. "Elliot, what about the insurance payout timing? If something happens to C after the transfers, will there be questions?" Elliot's reply, "Not if you follow the plan exactly. Grief-stricken widower scenario. Very believable. Grief-stricken widower scenario. They weren't just planning to steal my money. They were planning to kill me." I backed out of the kitchen so fast I knocked into a chair, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. This wasn't financial fraud, it was premeditated murder with a side of grand theft. Gerald stirred in the bedroom, mumbling something in his sleep. I froze until his breathing settled back into the deep rhythm of unconsciousness, then crept to the guest bathroom and called Miriam. "It's 4 in the morning," she answered on the first ring, alert immediately. "What happened?" "They're planning to kill me," I whispered into the phone. "After they get my money." "Miriam, there are emails." "Stop. Don't say another word over the phone. Get out of the house. Now. I can't just." "Claudine." Her voice was sharp as steel. "If they're planning murder, staying in that house is suicide. Pack a bag. Go to a hotel. We'll meet at sunrise." I ended the call and stood in the bathroom, staring at my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me had gray roots showing through her dyed brown hair, worry lines etched deep around her eyes, and the pale complexion of someone who'd just discovered her husband wanted her dead. But there was something else in that reflection. Something I hadn't seen in years. Fight. I packed quickly, just essentials in an old gym bag. As I was leaving, I made one last stop at Gerald's office. If he was planning my murder, I wanted to know everything. His computer was password protected, but Gerald had always been predictable. I tried our anniversary date first. Nothing. His birthday. Nothing. Then I remembered his golf obsession and tried the name of his favorite course. The screen unlocked. Gerald's email account was a goldmine of evidence. Months of correspondence with Elliot Price, planning my financial destruction down to the last detail. But it was the other email thread that made my knees weak. Messages with someone named Vivian Hale. V. Can't wait to start our new life together. Just a few more weeks and C will be out of the picture permanently. The house, the pension, everything will be ours. G. Vivian's response included photos. A blonde woman in her 40s with perfect teeth and expensive jewelry, posing in what looked like a luxury condo. Gerald, darling, I've been patient long enough. You promised this would be over by summer. I'm tired of hiding, tired of pretending we're just friends. When can we be together openly? Gerald's reply was dated just 2 days ago. Soon, sweetheart. C's retirement party was the perfect opportunity to start the final phase. By July, we'll be free. The final phase. The drug in my drink hadn't been random. It was step 1 of Gerald's master plan to erase me from existence. I scrolled through more messages, my horror growing with each revelation. Gerald and Vivian had been planning this for over a year. The other woman who'd smiled at me from across the retirement party hall, she'd known exactly what Gerald was about to do to me. They'd picked out furniture for our new house. Discussed honeymoon destinations. Even debated whether to keep my jewelry or sell it. The folder with my name on it sat in Gerald's locked drawer like a loaded gun. I'd found his spare key taped under his desk. Typical Gerald, always having backups for his backups. My hands shook as I turned the lock, knowing that whatever was inside would change everything. The folder was thick. Too thick for a woman who'd supposedly signed only basic documents over the years. I spread the contents across our kitchen table under the morning sun, and my world tilted sideways. A revised will naming Gerald as sole beneficiary of my pension. A power of attorney form with my signature, except I'd never signed it. Bank transfer authorizations for amounts that made my stomach drop. And worst of all, a life insurance policy I'd never seen before, with a death benefit that would make Gerald rich. Each document looked official, professional. But the signatures. Something was wrong with the signatures. I pulled out a magnifying glass from our junk drawer and studied my supposed handwriting under the light. The C in Claudine looked right. The loops in my E's matched my style. But there was something mechanical about them, like someone had traced my name very, very carefully. Then I saw it, in the insurance document. Whoever forged my signature had hesitated on the final R in Mercer. The pen line was slightly thicker, like they'd paused to remember how I finished that letter. Gerald had been practicing my signature. For months, maybe years. I photographed everything with my phone, my hands steadier now that shock was giving way to fury. How long had he been planning this? How many quiet evenings had he spent in this office, perfecting my handwriting while I watched television in the next room? The timestamps on the documents told their own story. The will revision was dated 2 months ago. The power of attorney form showed last month. The insurance policy was dated just last week, 3 days before my retirement party. Gerald hadn't just planned to drug me. He'd been setting up my financial murder for months. I was sliding the documents back into their folder when I heard his car in the driveway. My heart hammered against my ribs as I locked the drawer and replaced the key, smoothing everything back to normal just as his footsteps hit the front porch. "Honey, I'm back," Gerald called out, his voice cheerful and loving. "Got your favorite bagels from Sherman's." Sherman's Bakery. The same place we'd gone for breakfast on our first anniversary. He was still playing the devoted husband, even while planning my destruction. "Be right there," I called back, forcing brightness into my voice. At Miriam's office that afternoon, I laid out everything like evidence at a crime scene. The photographs, the business card, the notebook, even the glass with its telltale residue. Miriam Holt had been my mentee once, a sharp young paralegal I'd helped navigate office politics 15 years ago. Now she was a partner in her own firm, specializing in elder law and financial abuse cases. Her dark hair was streaked with silver, and her eyes were harder than I remembered, like she'd seen too much of what people could do to each other. She studied the documents in silence, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. When she looked up, her expression was grim. "Claudine, this is sophisticated. Whoever helped Gerald with these documents knows what they're doing. The forgeries are good, not perfect, but good enough to fool most people." "Helped him?" My voice cracked. "You mean he didn't do this alone?" "No way. Look at the legal language, the document structure. Gerald had professional help. Probably from someone who specializes in this kind of thing." She tapped her pen against the desk. "We need to prove these signatures are forged, and we need to do it fast." The judge's gavel came down at exactly 10:43, and Gerald's face went white as paper. "Emergency injunction granted," Judge Patricia Hendricks announced, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "All accounts, assets, and financial instruments belonging to Mrs. Claudine Mercer are hereby frozen pending investigation into allegations of fraud and forgery." Miriam had moved faster than lightning. By the time Gerald arrived at Harold Morrison's office at 9 o'clock, expecting to find me ready to sign away my life, Miriam was already presenting evidence to the court. Bank records, metadata analysis, forged signatures, everything laid out in devastating detail. The courtroom wasn't crowded, but word travels fast in a small legal community. I watched from the gallery as Gerald's lawyer, a nervous young man who clearly hadn't expected this fight, shuffled through papers with increasing panic. "Your Honor," the lawyer stammered, "my client contests these allegations. Mr. Mercer is a respected member of the community." "Mr. Mercer," Judge Hendricks interrupted, "is accused of forging his wife's signature on multiple financial documents, attempting to drug her, and conspiring to commit fraud. The evidence presented by Mrs. Mercer's counsel is compelling." Gerald sat perfectly still in his chair, but I could see the muscle ticking in his jaw. This wasn't how his plan was supposed to go. He'd expected me to be compliant, confused, maybe even dead by now. Instead, I was sitting 20 feet behind him, very much alive and armed with a team of professionals. Dr. Rao took the stand and methodically destroyed Gerald's careful forgeries. Under oath, he explained pressure analysis, handwriting flow patterns, and metadata manipulation in terms so clear that even Gerald's lawyer stopped trying to object. "In my expert opinion," Dr. Rao concluded, "Mrs. Mercer's signature was forged on all documents submitted to this court. Furthermore, the digital manipulation of timestamps suggests a coordinated effort to backdate these forgeries." The prosecutor, yes, Miriam had gotten the district attorney's office involved, stood up next. "Your Honor, we have evidence that Mr. Mercer was working with financial advisor Elliot Price to execute these fraudulent transfers. Mr. Price has agreed to cooperate with our investigation." Elliot Price. Gerald's golf buddy had rolled over faster than a trained dog when faced with criminal charges. Some friendship. But the moment that broke Gerald completely came when they played the recording. Miriam had gotten a warrant for Gerald's phone records, and buried in his voicemail was a message from Vivian Hale that painted the entire conspiracy in living color. "Gerald, sweetheart, I'm getting impatient. You promised Claudine would be gone by summer, and it's already June. Elliot says the money is ready to transfer, but we need her out of the way first. I can't keep pretending to be your friend's wife at these community events. It's humiliating. Call me back and tell me the plan is still on track. I've already put a deposit down on that condo in Malibu we looked at." The courtroom was dead silent when the recording ended. Gerald's shoulders sagged like a man who'd just watched his house burn down. Judge Hendricks didn't need to deliberate long. "Mrs. Mercer, your assets are protected. Mr. Mercer, you are hereby enjoined from accessing, transferring, or attempting to control any financial accounts belonging to your wife. Additionally, this court is referring all evidence to the district attorney for potential criminal prosecution." Outside the courthouse, Miriam and I stood in the morning sunshine while Gerald and his lawyer slunk away like beaten dogs. "That's just round one," Miriam warned me. "Gerald's going to fight back. Men like him don't give up easily." She was right. Within hours, Gerald had hired a more expensive lawyer and was spinning the story to anyone who'd listen. "I was having a breakdown," he claimed. Retirement had triggered some kind of mental instability. The switched glasses were a figment of my imagination, the forged signatures were a misunderstanding, and his relationship with Vivian was purely platonic. But I had something Gerald didn't expect: allies. My former colleagues from the office rallied around me with a fierce loyalty that took my breath away. Patricia, my old boss, organized a support group that met twice weekly. Sarah from accounting set up a legal defense fund. Even the security guard, Marcus, offered to keep an eye on things if Gerald came around my house. More importantly, women started talking. Quiet conversations in coffee shops and grocery store aisles about husbands who'd become controlling, about financial documents that appeared without explanation, about retirement parties that felt more like funerals. I wasn't the only one. Gerald's playbook wasn't original, it was epidemic. 3 days after the injunction, Elliot Price's office called Miriam with an offer. "My client wants to cooperate fully," his lawyer explained during a tense conference call. "In exchange for immunity, Mr. Price will provide all records of his dealings with Gerald Mercer and testimony regarding the planned fraudulent transfers." Elliot's cooperation gave us everything we needed. Bank account numbers in the Cayman Islands. A detailed timeline of the murder plot. Even recordings of phone calls where Gerald discussed the Claudine problem, like he was talking about pest control. But the smoking gun came from an unexpected source: Vivian Hale herself. Apparently, Gerald's darling girlfriend had been recording their conversations for months, creating her own insurance policy in case he decided to betray her too. Smart woman. Terrible person, but smart. In one recording, Gerald's voice was chillingly casual. "Once the pension transfer's clear, we'll need to move to phase 2. Something that looks natural. Heart attack, maybe, or a fall down the stairs. Insurance companies don't investigate accidents too closely if there's no obvious motive." Vivian's giggling response made my skin crawl. "You're so thorough, darling. That's what I love about you." When Miriam played that recording in her office, I had to excuse myself to throw up in the bathroom. Hearing Gerald plan my murder in detail, discussing methods, timing, cleanup, was like listening to my own autopsy before I was dead. But it was also liberating. Every doubt I'd harbored about Gerald's intentions evaporated. Every moment of guilt I'd felt for betraying my husband disappeared. Gerald had stopped being my husband the moment he decided I was worth more dead than alive. The media picked up the story by week's end. Retirement party poisoning plot made headlines in papers from here to Sacramento. Gerald's face appeared on television, labeled as alleged attempted murderer, while reporters camped outside our house. I stayed at a hotel, watching the news coverage with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. The house on Elm Street where I'd planted roses and hosted Thanksgiving dinners was now a crime scene. The life I'd built for 28 years was over. But I was alive. And Gerald's plan was in ruins. The settlement offer came on a Friday afternoon. Gerald would relinquish all claims to my assets, plead guilty to reduced charges, and accept a 5-year prison sentence. In exchange, Vivian would avoid prosecution as a co-conspirator. "It's a good deal," Miriam explained. Better than risking a trial where Gerald might charm a jury. I stared at the settlement papers, thinking about the woman I'd been a month ago. Trusting, naive, grateful for small kindnesses from a man who saw me as an obstacle to overcome. What happens to Vivian? I asked. She disappears. Finds another rich husband to manipulate, probably. And Gerald? 5 years minimum security. He'll be out in 3 with good behavior. 3 years. For planning my murder, Gerald would serve less time than I'd spent training new employees at the office. But then I remembered something Dr. Rao had said during the hearing. Mrs. Mercer, your husband made one critical mistake. He underestimated you. Gerald had underestimated me. He'd seen a quiet wife who kept house and asked no questions, who would drink whatever he put in front of her and sign whatever he put in front of her and die whenever he decided it was convenient. He'd never seen the woman who'd spent 35 years paying attention to details, catching discrepancies, and solving problems that others had given up on. He'd married Claudine the wife, but he'd tried to destroy Claudine the professional. Big mistake. I signed the settlement papers with a steady hand, using the same signature Gerald had tried so hard to forge. But this time, it was real. One more thing, I told Miriam as we prepared to leave her office. I want to make sure this never happens to another woman. Miriam smiled. What did you have in mind? If you could freeze one thing belonging to someone who betrayed you, what would it be? Comment to encourage Claudine. The wedding videographer's camera caught everything, including the moment Gerald tried to kill me. We'd forgotten about Rebecca Mills, the photographer Gerald had hired for the retirement party. Professional wedding photographers always set up multiple angles, and Rebecca was no exception. While everyone watched me give my speech, her second camera captured the dessert table from behind. Miriam found Rebecca through the party rental company, and what she discovered changed everything. Mrs. Mercer, Rebecca said, setting up her laptop in Miriam's conference room, I almost deleted this footage. But something about your husband's behavior bothered me that night. He seemed nervous. The video played in high definition. There was Gerald, clear as daylight, removing a small vial from his pocket. His fingers worked quickly, professionally, like he'd practiced the motion 100 times. The tiny white pill dropped into my champagne glass and dissolved in seconds. But the camera caught something else, something that made my blood freeze. Gerald checked his watch. Then he looked directly at someone across the room and nodded. Miriam paused the video. Who's he nodding to? Rebecca zoomed in, and there she was. Vivian Hale, standing near the exit doors, wearing a black dress and checking her own watch. When Gerald nodded, she smiled and quietly slipped outside. She was there, I whispered. She was watching him poison me. The timestamp on the video showed 8:47 p.m., exactly when I'd switched the glasses. If Gerald's plan had worked, I would have been unconscious by 9 o'clock, rushed to the hospital by 9:30, and dead from complications before midnight. Vivian had been waiting in the parking lot, ready to comfort Gerald in his tragic loss. But the video held one more secret. As Rebecca continued playing the footage, we watched Gerald's face when he realized I'd switched our glasses. The terror, the confusion, the moment he understood his careful plan had backfired. Then something chilling happened. Gerald excused himself and walked outside, presumably to find Vivian. The camera, still rolling, caught him through the window having what looked like an urgent conversation with someone in a dark sedan. Can you enhance that license plate? Miriam asked. Rebecca worked her magic with professional editing software. The plate became visible, Price 1. Elliot Price had been there too. All 3 conspirators had attended my retirement party, watching me like vultures waiting for roadkill. This changes everything, Miriam said, rewinding the video. We're not just talking about fraud anymore. This is conspiracy, attempted murder, and we have it all on camera. The district attorney's office moved fast once they saw the footage. Grand jury indictments came down within a week. Gerald was charged with attempted murder, conspiracy, and multiple counts of fraud. Elliot faced similar charges plus money laundering. Vivian was charged as an accessory to attempted murder. The media explosion was immediate. Retirement party murder plot caught on tape dominated headlines. Cable news channels played the footage endlessly, with legal experts dissecting every frame. I watched from my hotel room as Gerald was led away in handcuffs, his head covered with a jacket to hide from the cameras. The man who'd planned my murder was reduced to a perp walk, stumbling over his own feet while reporters shouted questions. But the real victory came 3 days later, during the preliminary hearing. Gerald's new lawyer, expensive, slick, the kind who usually got rich men out of trouble, tried to claim the video was taken out of context. "Your Honor," he argued, "my client was simply adjusting decorations on the dessert table. The alleged pill could have been anything, an antacid, a breath mint." Judge Hendricks interrupted him. "Counselor, are you suggesting your client carries unmarked pills in his pocket to social events?" "Well, no, but—" "And that he habitually drops these mystery pills into his wife's drinks?" The lawyer had no answer. The video was too clear, too damning, too obviously premeditated. Gerald pleaded guilty to reduced charges that same afternoon. But the hearing took an unexpected turn when Vivian's lawyer requested to address the court. "Your Honor, my client has information about additional victims. Mr. Mercer's activities extend beyond this single incident." Additional victims. The words hit me like a physical blow. Vivian, facing 20 years in prison, had decided to save herself by revealing everything. And Gerald's plan to kill me wasn't his first attempt at widowhood. Mrs. Dorothy Chun, Vivian's lawyer continued, died in Sacramento in 2019. Natural causes, according to the death certificate. But my client has recordings that suggest otherwise. Gerald's first wife. I'd known Dorothy had died of a heart attack, but Gerald rarely talked about her. Now I understood why. The recordings were played in open court. Gerald's voice, casual and cold. Dorothy's insurance policy finally paid out. $200,000, just like we planned. Vivian's voice, "You're sure no one suspected anything?" Gerald's laugh was chilling. "Who's going to investigate a 70-year-old woman having a heart attack? I gave her just enough digitalis to stop her heart. Looked completely natural." Dorothy Chun had been murdered. Gerald had killed his first wife and gotten away with it, which gave him the confidence to try killing me. How many other women were there? How many quiet deaths, grieving widowers, and insurance payouts? The courtroom erupted. Dorothy's adult children, who'd been suspicious of their stepfather's quick remarriage, demanded the case be reopened. The Sacramento police announced an immediate investigation. Gerald's lawyer tried to claim the recordings were fabricated, but audio forensics proved they were authentic. Gerald's voice patterns, his distinctive laugh, even background sounds from his office, everything checked out. By the end of the week, Gerald was facing charges in 2 states. The death penalty was suddenly on the table. I sat in that courtroom watching my husband of 28 years transform from a respected community member into a serial killer, and I felt something I hadn't expected: pity. Not for Gerald, he deserved everything coming to him. But for Dorothy, who'd trusted him with her life. For the woman Gerald might have killed next if I hadn't switched those glasses. For all the wives who'd never seen the poison coming. Judge Hendricks set Gerald's trial date for November. Elliot and Vivian would testify against him in exchange for reduced sentences. The case would likely take months to resolve, but the outcome was never in doubt. Gerald was finished. As we left the courthouse, Miriam put her arm around my shoulders. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Like I dodged a bullet," I said. "Literally." But walking to our cars, I noticed a familiar figure standing near the parking meters. A woman in her 50s, well-dressed, watching us with keen interest. She approached hesitantly. "Mrs. Mercer? I'm Janet Williams. I think my husband might be planning something similar." Janet's story poured out on the courthouse steps. A recent cancer diagnosis, a husband suddenly interested in her will, mysterious pills appearing in her medication bottle. The same pattern, the same playbook Gerald had used on me. "I saw your case on the news," Janet explained, tears streaming down her face. "And I realized, he's not trying to help me get better. He's waiting for me to die." Miriam handed Janet her business card, but I knew one lawyer couldn't handle an epidemic. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. "If you were in that room, would you want the video public? Say yes or no below." The anonymous text arrived at midnight. "Stop talking or join your husband's first wife." I stared at the message on my phone, my hands shaking in the lamplight of my hotel room. Someone was threatening to kill me, and they knew about Dorothy Chun. But who? Gerald was in jail. Elliot was cooperating with prosecutors. Vivian was under house arrest. Who else had a stake in keeping Gerald's secrets buried? The answer came the next morning when Miriam called with devastating news. "Claudine, we have a problem. Someone tried to access your frozen bank accounts overnight. They used Gerald's old passwords and account information, but the attempt was traced to an IP address in Nevada. Nevada, where Gerald's brother Frank lived with his wife Karen. The couple who'd always seemed too interested in our financial situation, who'd asked pointed questions about my retirement savings at every family gathering. Frank and Karen are involved?" I asked, though the pieces were already clicking together in my mind. "It looks like this conspiracy goes deeper than we thought." The Sacramento police found evidence that Frank helped Gerald with Dorothy's murder. He was the one who obtained the digitalis. Frank, Gerald's younger brother, a pharmacist who'd always been jealous of Gerald's success. The family member who'd visited us frequently in the months before my retirement, who'd had access to our house, our routines, our schedules. "There's more," Miriam continued. "Janet Williams, the woman who approached you yesterday? Someone broke into her house last night. She's in the hospital." The threat was escalating. Whoever was behind this wasn't just trying to silence me, they were actively hunting down other potential victims. I checked out of my hotel immediately and moved to a safe house Miriam had arranged through the district attorney's office. But even there, surrounded by security cameras and armed guards, I felt exposed. The calls started that afternoon. My phone rang constantly, reporters, lawyers, other women who'd heard about Janet and wanted to share their own stories of suspicious husbands. Each call was more chilling than the last. My husband started talking about cremation after my cancer diagnosis, one woman whispered. "He's never mentioned cremation before." "The life insurance agent keeps calling," another said. "My husband claims he didn't schedule the meetings, but the agent has his personal cell phone number." "I found powdered medications in my husband's briefcase," a third woman revealed. "When I asked about them, he said they were vitamins. But I looked them up online, they're heart medications. I don't have heart problems." By evening, Miriam's office had received calls from 12 different women across 3 states. All married to men who'd shown sudden interest in their wives' mortality. All frightened, all suspicious, all looking for help. "This isn't random," Miriam told me during our emergency meeting. "Gerald and Frank weren't working alone. There's a network, men sharing information, techniques, maybe even victims." The FBI got involved the next day. Special Agent Maria Santos sat across from me in the safe house conference room, her expression grim as she laid out photographs and documents. "Mrs. Mercer, we've been investigating what we call predatory widowhood for 2 years. Men who systematically murder their wives for financial gain, then move on to new victims. Your case broke it wide open." The photographs showed Gerald at various social events over the past 5 years. Charity fundraisers, community gatherings, church functions. In every photo, he was talking to different women. Older women, recently widowed women, women with visible assets and no close family. "We think Gerald was recruiting," Agent Santos explained. "Finding lonely women, establishing relationships, then eliminating them once he'd gained access to their finances." The pattern was sickening. Gerald would befriend a widow at some social function, offer comfort and companionship, gradually work his way into her life, and then arrange her death once he'd been added to her will or insurance policy. Dorothy Chun wasn't his first victim, she was just his first wife victim. "How many?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "We've identified at least 7 suspicious deaths connected to Gerald over the past decade. All women, all aged 65 or older, all with significant assets and no immediate family." 7 women. Gerald had been a serial killer for 10 years, hiding behind his reputation as a devoted husband and community leader. But the investigation revealed something even more disturbing. Gerald wasn't the only one. "The network spans multiple states," Agent Santos continued. "We've identified at least 20 men using similar methods. They share techniques, target lists, even alibis for each other." 20 men. Hundreds of potential victims. Women dying quiet deaths while their grieving husbands collected insurance money and moved on to the next target. "Why hasn't this been exposed before?" Miriam asked. "Because the victims fit a profile that makes investigation unlikely," Agent Santos explained. "Older women, often isolated, deaths that appear natural. Local police don't have the resources to investigate every elderly death, and insurance companies rarely question payouts to grieving spouses. The perfect crime, repeated hundreds of times across the country. But Gerald had made a crucial mistake. He'd tried to kill a woman who fought back. "Mrs. Mercer, we need your help," Agent Santos said. "You're the key witness who can bring down this entire operation. But testifying against Gerald is just the beginning. We need you to help us identify other victims, other perpetrators." I thought about Dorothy Chun, about Janet Williams lying in a hospital bed, about the women who'd called Miriam's office with their terrifying stories. "What do you need me to do?" Agent Santos smiled for the first time since entering the room. "We need you to tell your story. Publicly, completely, without holding back. Every detail about Gerald's behavior, his methods, his network of accomplices." "Won't that put me in more danger?" "Yes. But it's the only way to save the women who don't know their targets yet." That night, I sat in my safe house room staring at the ceiling, knowing that my choice would determine whether Gerald's network continued operating or finally faced justice. The phone call that decided everything came at dawn. The voice was elderly, shaky, frightened. "Mrs. Mercer? My name is Helen Rodriguez. I saw you on the news, and I think my husband is trying to kill me too." Helen's story was terrifyingly familiar. A husband who'd become controlling after her recent inheritance from her sister. Mysterious pills appearing in her morning coffee. Life insurance policies being updated without her knowledge. "He told me yesterday that he's planning a romantic weekend getaway," Helen whispered. "Somewhere remote," he said. "Just the 2 of us. But Mrs. Mercer, I'm scared. What if I don't come back?" I made my decision in that moment. "Helen, listen to me very carefully. Would you be terrified or furious in Claudine's shoes? React in the comments. The FBI sting operation began with Helen Rodriguez wearing a wire to dinner with her husband. 3 days later, we had everything we needed. Helen's husband, Robert, had been recorded discussing disposal methods with Frank Mercer, planning Helen's murder down to the smallest detail. The romantic weekend getaway was supposed to end with Helen's body at the bottom of Lake Tahoe. Instead, it ended with Robert in federal custody and Helen safely relocated to witness protection. But the real breakthrough came when Frank Mercer, facing federal murder charges, decided to cooperate fully with the FBI. What he revealed shattered everything we thought we knew about Gerald's operation. It started as a joke, Frank told Agent Santos during his debriefing. Gerald was complaining about Dorothy's medical bills, and I said he'd be better off if she just died. Next thing I knew, he was asking me about untraceable poisons. Frank's pharmacy records went back 15 years, showing suspicious orders for Digitalis, insulin, and other medications that could cause natural deaths in elderly victims. He'd been supplying the murder weapons while Gerald and his network provided the targets. We called it the Grieving Widowers Club, Frank continued. Men who'd lost their wives and needed support. Except we weren't grieving, we were celebrating. The club met monthly at different locations, always somewhere public but private, back rooms of restaurants, community center meeting spaces, even church basements. They shared stories, techniques, and target lists like a twisted book club for murderers. Agent Santos played me recordings from their meetings, and I had to leave the room twice to vomit. These men discussed killing women the way other people discussed fantasy football, with statistics, strategies, and competitive scoring. Gerald was the star, Frank explained. 7 successful eliminations with 0 investigations. The other guys looked up to him. The other guys. 23 men across 12 states, all using Gerald's methods to murder their wives and girlfriends. The FBI estimated they'd killed at least 47 women over the past decade. 47 women whose deaths had been labeled natural causes, whose murders had gone unnoticed and unpunished. But Frank's cooperation gave us more than just confessions. It gave us evidence. The club had kept detailed records of their activities, including photographs, videos, and financial records showing insurance payouts and asset transfers. They'd been documenting their crimes like trophies. The mass arrests began on a Tuesday morning. Coordinated raids in 12 states, 23 men taken into custody simultaneously. The news coverage was unprecedented. Cable channels ran continuous updates as the widower murder ring story dominated headlines. I watched from my safe house as Gerald's mugshot appeared alongside his co-conspirators, a rogues gallery of ordinary-looking men who'd been systematically murdering women for profit. Teachers, accountants, retirees, small business owners. Men who blended seamlessly into their communities while operating as cold-blooded killers. The public reaction was immediate and furious. Vigils were held for the identified victims. Support groups formed for the surviving widows who'd escaped similar fates. Legislation was introduced requiring investigation of all suspicious deaths involving recent insurance payouts. But the moment that mattered most to me came during Gerald's final court appearance. The courtroom was packed with families of victims, FBI agents, prosecutors, and media representatives. Gerald sat at the defense table looking smaller than I remembered, his expensive suit unable to hide the fact that he was just a coward who preyed on trusting women. When Judge Hendricks asked if he had anything to say before sentencing, Gerald stood slowly and looked directly at me. "Claudine," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I'm sorry." Sorry. After 28 years of marriage, after planning my murder, after being part of a network that killed 47 women, he was sorry. I stood up in the gallery, every eye in the courtroom turning toward me. "You're sorry you got caught," I said clearly. "You're not sorry Dorothy Chen is dead. You're not sorry about the 46 other women your club murdered. You're sorry your plan failed." Gerald's face crumpled, but I wasn't finished. I trusted you with my life, and you tried to take it for money. But you made one mistake, Gerald. You underestimated me. You saw a quiet wife who'd sign whatever you put in front of her and die whenever you decided it was convenient. My voice grew stronger with each word. But I spent 35 years paying attention to details you overlooked. I noticed when things didn't add up. I saved receipts you thought I'd throw away. I trusted my instincts when you tried to make me doubt them. The courtroom was dead silent. You tried to erase me, Gerald. Instead, you gave me purpose. Because of what you did to me, 47 families finally have answers. Dozens of other women are alive today because they learned to recognize the warning signs. I looked around the courtroom at the faces of the other survivors, the families of victims, the law enforcement officers who'd worked tirelessly to expose this network. You didn't just fail to kill me, Gerald. You created an army of women who will never be victims again. Judge Hendricks sentenced Gerald to life in prison without possibility of parole. The 22 other defendants received similar sentences, with Frank Mercer getting life plus 20 years for his role as the network supplier. Vivian Hale, who'd cooperated extensively with prosecutors, received 15 years and was required to testify in all related cases. Elliot Price got 12 years and forfeiture of all assets obtained through the conspiracy. Justice had been served, but the real victory was what came next. The Claudine Mercer Foundation launched 6 months later, funded by the seized assets from the murder network. Our mission was simple: educate women about financial abuse and provide resources for those who suspected their partners were planning to harm them. We created a hotline, support groups, legal aid programs, and educational materials. Most importantly, we trained law enforcement officers to recognize the warning signs of predatory widowhood. In our first year, we helped investigate 37 suspicious deaths and prevented at least 12 planned murders. Women learned to trust their instincts, document suspicious behavior, and seek help before it was too late. Helen Rodriguez became our first success story. After testifying against her husband, she used her inheritance to start a scholarship program for women studying forensic accounting. If I'd known how to read financial documents, she said, I might have caught Robert's plan sooner. Janet Williams recovered from her injuries and became a volunteer counselor, helping other women recognize the signs of spousal plotting. Her husband was convicted of attempted murder and sentenced to 20 years. The ripple effects continued spreading. Insurance companies changed their investigation protocols. Police departments received training on elder abuse and financial murder. Medical examiners began looking more carefully at sudden deaths involving recent insurance changes. But the change that mattered most was the simplest one: women started talking. They talked about husbands who'd become controlling after diagnoses or inheritances. They talked about mysterious medications and sudden interest in wills. They talked about feeling scared in their own homes and not knowing why. They talked, and other women listened, and predatory men found it much harder to operate in the shadows. If Claudine's calm courage moved you, like the video, share it with someone who needs to know why small details matter. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, exactly 1 year after Gerald's sentencing. I was working in my new office at the foundation headquarters when my assistant brought in the mail. Among the usual correspondence was a thick envelope with no return address, my name written in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a letter that changed everything I thought I knew about my marriage. Dear Mrs. Mercer, it began, my name is Patricia Donnelly, and I was Gerald's first wife, before Dorothy Chen. I read that line 3 times before it sank in. Gerald had been married before Dorothy. There was a whole part of his life he'd never mentioned, a woman whose existence he'd completely erased from his history. Patricia's letter continued. I've been following your case in the news, and I needed to reach out. Gerald didn't kill me, but he tried. In 1987, when I was 32 and he was 35, he attempted to poison me with antifreeze mixed into my morning coffee. I survived only because our neighbor, a retired nurse, recognized the symptoms and rushed me to the hospital. Antifreeze poisoning. Gerald had been refining his murder methods for over 30 years. The police investigated, but Gerald had an alibi. He was at work when I got sick. No one suspected him because he was the loving, concerned husband rushing to be by my bedside. The case was closed as accidental poisoning, possibly from contaminated water pipes. Patricia had divorced Gerald quietly, moved across the country, and changed her name. She'd spent 35 years looking over her shoulder, wondering if he'd try to find her and finish what he started. When I saw your story on television, she wrote, I realized you were the woman who finally stopped him. You saved not just yourself, but every woman he would have targeted after you. But Patricia's letter held more than just her story. She'd kept evidence. I never threw away the hospital records, the police report, or the samples of coffee the lab tested. I also have photographs Gerald took of me while I was unconscious in the hospital, photos I found years later hidden in his desk. I think he was planning to use them somehow, maybe to fake grief or document my illness. Gerald had been documenting his crimes from the very beginning. Patricia's evidence filled in gaps the FBI hadn't been able to close. Her medical records showed antifreeze poisoning in 1987. The police report documented suspicious circumstances that had been dismissed too easily. Most disturbing, the photographs showed Gerald posing beside Patricia's hospital bed, smiling like he was on vacation instead of watching his wife fight for her life. But the final item in Patricia's package was what brought tears to my eyes. I've enclosed a diary I kept during our marriage. I started writing in it because I felt like I was going crazy. Gerald would do things, say things, then deny they'd ever happened. The diary was my way of proving to myself that my memories were real. Patricia's diary read like a blueprint for psychological abuse. Gerald gaslighting her about conversations they'd had, moving her belongings and denying he'd touched them, isolating her from friends and family, gradually gaining control over every aspect of her life. The same pattern he'd used on Dorothy Chun. The same pattern he'd been using on me. I called Agent Santos immediately. This changes our timeline completely, she said after reviewing Patricia's evidence. Gerald has been killing women for 35 years, not 10. We need to reopen cold cases going back to the 1980s. Patricia agreed to testify, despite her fears about facing Gerald again. Her evidence led to additional charges and helped prosecutors in 3 other states connect unsolved deaths to Gerald's network. But for me, Patricia's letter answered a question that had haunted me since Gerald's arrest. How had I lived with a monster for 28 years without knowing what he was? The answer was that Gerald was a master manipulator who'd been perfecting his techniques for decades. Every kindness, every romantic gesture, every moment of apparent love had been calculated to maintain control while he planned my destruction. I hadn't been naive or stupid. I'd been expertly manipulated by a predator who specialized in fooling intelligent, capable women. The realization was both devastating and liberating. I flew to Seattle to meet Patricia in person. She was a small woman with silver hair and kind eyes that held decades of carefully guarded fear. We sat in her living room drinking tea and sharing stories about the man who'd tried to kill us both. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't switched those glasses? Patricia asked. Every day, I admitted. But then I remember all the women who are alive because I did switch them. Patricia smiled. That's what I tell myself too. Surviving Gerald wasn't just about us, it was about all the future victims we saved. Before leaving Seattle, Patricia and I visited the cemetery where Dorothy Chun was buried. We stood at her grave in silence, 2 women who'd escaped the fate that claimed Gerald's second wife. She deserved better, Patricia whispered. They all did, I replied. Back home, I threw myself into the Foundation's work with renewed purpose. Patricia's evidence had given us crucial insights into how predatory partners operated over time, allowing us to develop better training materials and warning systems. We launched a new program called Trust Your Instincts, helping women document suspicious behavior and recognize gaslighting techniques. Patricia agreed to share her diary excerpts in our educational materials, showing how abuse escalated gradually and systematically. The program saved lives. Within 6 months, we'd helped 23 women escape potentially dangerous situations. The pattern was always the same: small incidents that seemed innocent individually but formed a clear picture when documented together. Gerald's appeals were all denied. The evidence against him was overwhelming, the network's crimes too extensive and well documented to dispute. He would die in prison, and the world would be safer for it. But the work continued. New cases emerged regularly. Women who recognized the warning signs from our materials, law enforcement officers who'd learned to investigate suspicious deaths more thoroughly, insurance companies that flagged potential fraud before payouts. The widower murder ring had been dismantled, but predatory behavior existed everywhere. Our job was to make sure women knew how to recognize it and had resources available when they did. One evening, as I was preparing to leave the office, I received a call from a woman named Sarah Martinez. "Mrs. Mercer," she said, "I think my husband is planning to kill me. But I don't have proof, just a feeling. What should I do?" I settled back into my chair. "Tell me everything, Sarah. Start from the beginning, and don't leave out any details, even the ones that seem unimportant." As Sarah told her story, I took notes and asked questions, helping her piece together a pattern of behavior that was frighteningly familiar. By the end of our conversation, we'd identified 16 separate incidents that, taken together, suggested Sarah was indeed in danger. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "Now we build a case," I said. "Document everything, preserve evidence, and keep you safe while we do it." 3 months later, Sarah's husband was arrested for attempted murder when he tried to poison her dinner with insulin. Sarah survived because she trusted her instincts and reached out for help. Another woman saved. Another predator stopped. The work was hard, sometimes heartbreaking, but it was necessary. Every phone call, every success story, every woman who walked away from a dangerous situation instead of becoming a victim, they all mattered. I thought about Gerald sometimes, sitting in his prison cell, probably wondering how his perfect plan had gone so wrong. He'd underestimated one quiet woman at a retirement party, and that single mistake had brought down an entire network of killers. If I could speak to him now, I'd tell him what I told the courtroom: "You tried to erase me, but instead, you gave me purpose." The letter from Patricia had reminded me that survival wasn't enough. Justice meant making sure it never happened to anyone else. Do you accept quiet justice, or do you need public vengeance? Share your feeling below. The phone call came at midnight on the anniversary of my retirement party, exactly 2 years since Gerald dropped that pill into my champagne. "Mrs. Mercer?" The voice was young, frightened. "My name is Amanda Chen. Dorothy Chen was my grandmother." I sat up in bed, instantly alert. Dorothy's granddaughter. I'd wondered about Dorothy's family, whether they'd found peace after learning the truth about her murder. "Amanda, what can I do for you?" "I found something," she whispered. "In my grandmother's attic, hidden under a loose floorboard. It's a letter. From her. She knew." My blood went cold. She knew what? That Gerald was going to kill her. She wrote it all down: his behavior changes, the mysterious pills, even his conversations with someone named Frank. She hid the letter like she knew she was running out of time. Dorothy had known. Gerald's second wife had recognized the danger, documented it, but hadn't been able to escape in time. Amanda agreed to meet me the next morning at a coffee shop downtown. She was a slight young woman with her grandmother's gentle eyes, clutching a manila envelope like it contained explosive materials. "I almost threw this away," Amanda admitted, sliding the envelope across the table. "But something made me read it first. When I saw Gerald's name, I remembered you from the trial." Dorothy's letter was dated 3 days before her death, written in the shaky handwriting of a frightened woman. "If something happens to me, if I die suddenly of natural causes, please know that Gerald Mercer murdered me. He has been slowly poisoning me for weeks, maybe months. I've been getting sicker and sicker, and the doctors can't find anything wrong with me. Yesterday I heard him on the phone with his brother Frank, talking about digitalis and heart attacks. He doesn't know I was listening. He said I would be gone by the weekend and that no one would suspect anything. I've hidden this letter where I hope someone will find it someday. Gerald is a monster who hides behind a kind face. Don't let him fool you the way he fooled me." At the bottom of the letter, in increasingly shaky handwriting, Dorothy had added, "He told me I was imagining things, that I was sick and confused. But I know what I heard. Check under the attic floorboard in the northwest corner. I've left evidence there too." Amanda reached into her purse and pulled out a small plastic bag containing white pills. "I found these with the letter," she said. "My grandmother labeled them Gerald's vitamins that made me sick." The pills tested positive for digitalis, the same medication that had stopped Dorothy's heart. Dorothy Chun had died knowing she was being murdered, having documented her killer's methods and hidden evidence for future discovery. But her warnings had been dismissed by family members who thought she was becoming paranoid in old age. Why didn't anyone believe her? Amanda asked, tears streaming down her face. "Because Gerald was an expert at making women seem crazy," I explained gently. "He'd been practicing for decades." Dorothy's letter and evidence gave prosecutors additional ammunition against Gerald, but more importantly, it gave the Foundation a powerful tool for education. Here was a victim who'd recognized the danger, who'd tried to save herself, who'd left behind a clear warning about her killer's methods. With Amanda's permission, we made Dorothy's letter part of our training materials. We called it The Last Warning, a testament to what happened when women's instincts were ignored, when their fears were dismissed as paranoia. The impact was immediate. Women began taking their own suspicions more seriously. Families started listening when elderly relatives expressed concerns about their spouses. Healthcare providers learned to investigate unexplained symptoms in patients with recently increased life insurance. But Dorothy's story had a personal impact on me as well. Reading her letter, I saw my own future. What would have happened if I hadn't switched those glasses at my retirement party? I would have died like Dorothy, knowing I was being murdered but helpless to stop it. The Foundation's work expanded beyond individual cases. We partnered with law enforcement agencies to develop investigation protocols for suspicious elder deaths. We worked with insurance companies to flag potential fraud patterns. We collaborated with medical schools to train future doctors in recognizing poisoning symptoms. Most importantly, we created a database of predatory behavior patterns that law enforcement could use to identify potential killers before they claimed their first victim. The database had identified 12 potential murderers in its first year of operation. All 12 men were under investigation. Their wives and girlfriends quietly moved to safety while evidence was gathered. How many lives had been saved? How many Dorothy Chens would never have to write final letters under loose floorboards? The numbers were impossible to calculate, but every prevented murder was a victory. On a quiet Tuesday morning 3 years after Gerald's conviction, I received a visitor I wasn't expecting. Vivian Hale stood in my office doorway, looking nothing like the glamorous woman from Gerald's photos. Prison had aged her, stripped away the polished exterior that had hidden her willingness to profit from murder. "I know you don't want to see me," she said quietly. "But I had to come." Vivian had been released after serving 3 years of her 15-year sentence, her cooperation with ongoing investigations having earned her early parole. She looked smaller now, diminished, like a person who'd finally understood the weight of her actions. "What do you want?" I asked, not inviting her to sit. "To apologize. And to give you something." She placed a thick manila envelope on my desk. "These are recordings I never turned over to the FBI. Gerald made them himself. Conversations with other men in the network, planning sessions, even recordings of some of the murders." My hands trembled as I touched the envelope. "Why didn't you give these to prosecutors?" "Because I was scared. And selfish. I thought if I held something back, I'd have leverage later." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "But watching the news, seeing the women your foundation has saved, I realized I was still helping Gerald by keeping these secret." Inside the envelope were dozens of audio files on flash drives, each labeled with dates and locations. Gerald's voice describing murder methods. Other men sharing stories of successful kills. Even recordings from the Grieving Widowers Club meetings, where they'd celebrated their crimes like victories. "There's something else," Vivian whispered. "Gerald told me about a woman in Phoenix, someone he killed before Dorothy. Her name was Ruth Sandoval. He said it was his practice run, before he perfected his methods." Ruth Sandoval. Another victim, another family who deserved answers. I looked at Vivian, this broken woman who'd once giggled about my planned murder, and felt something unexpected, pity. "Why now?" I asked. "Because Gerald destroyed everyone he touched. You, Dorothy, Ruth, all those other women. But he destroyed me too. I lost myself helping him, and I can never get that back." She stood slowly. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted to make sure his victims finally got justice." Vivian's recordings led to 14 more arrests and solved 6 cold cases dating back 20 years. The Phoenix police reopened Ruth Sandoval's case, and Gerald was charged with her murder as well. More importantly, the recordings revealed the true scope of the network. It wasn't just 23 men, it was over 60, operating in small cells across the country. The FBI estimates they'd killed more than 200 women over 3 decades. 200 women. Mothers, grandmothers, wives, sisters. All murdered for their insurance money and assets by men who saw them as obstacles rather than human beings. But the work continued. Each arrest led to new investigations. Each solved case brought closure to families who'd wondered for years what had really happened to their loved ones. The foundation grew from a small office with 3 employees to a national organization with chapters in every state. We'd helped save over 300 women from dangerous situations, trained thousands of law enforcement officers, and fundamentally changed how the justice system investigated suspicious elder deaths. On the 5th anniversary of my retirement party, I stood at the podium of our annual conference, looking out at an audience of survivors, law enforcement officers, healthcare providers, and advocates. 5 years ago, I began, I was a woman who kept quiet, who trusted without question, who believed that being a good wife meant never suspecting your husband of evil. The audience was silent, hanging on every word. That woman almost died because she didn't trust her own instincts. But when I switched those glasses, when I chose to act on suspicion instead of dismiss it, I didn't just save my own life. I started a movement. Applause rippled through the crowd. Today, because of the work we've done together, suspicious deaths are investigated more thoroughly. Women are taught to document concerning behavior. Families listen when elderly relatives express fear about their spouses. I paused, thinking about Dorothy Chun, about Ruth Sandoval, about the 200 victims whose names we now knew. We can't bring back the women Gerald's network killed. But we can make sure their deaths weren't meaningless. Every woman we save, every predator we expose, every family that gets answers, that's their legacy. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. After the conference, I drove to the small cemetery where Dorothy Chun was buried. Her headstone now included the words "Beloved Mother and Grandmother." Her warning saved lives. I placed fresh flowers on her grave and sat on the nearby bench, watching the sun set behind the oak trees. My phone buzzed. A text from the foundation's hotline supervisor: "Just helped a woman in Denver escape a situation identical to yours. Husband was caught trying to poison her coffee. Another life saved. Another life saved." The words never got old. I thought about Gerald, sitting in his prison cell, probably still believing he'd been the victim of bad luck and feminine hysteria. He'd never understand that his downfall hadn't been chance. It had been the careful attention to detail of a woman who'd spent 35 years noticing things others missed. He'd tried to erase me with a capsule and forged signatures. I'd answered with the thing he'd never valued: my attention to the small details that revealed the bigger truth. The quiet justice I'd found wasn't dramatic or cinematic. It was steady, persistent work that saved lives one phone call at a time. It was turning pain into purpose, survival into service. As I drove home, I passed the community center where my retirement party had been held 5 years ago. The building looked the same, but everything else had changed. I was no longer Claudine Mercer, the quiet wife who kept house and asked no questions. I was Claudine Mercer, the woman who'd stopped a serial killer with nothing but her instincts and her unwillingness to be erased. And tomorrow morning, I'd go back to the office and answer more calls from women who needed to know they weren't crazy, they weren't paranoid, and they weren't alone. Because sometimes the most powerful revolution starts with one woman refusing to drink from a glass she didn't fill herself. The work continues. The fight goes on. And women like Dorothy Chun, like Ruth Sandoval, like all the others, their voices finally have someone listening. That's the real victory. Not revenge, not even justice in the traditional sense. Just the quiet satisfaction of knowing that evil was exposed, predators were stopped, and lives were saved. One switched glass at a time. If this story moved you, if Claudine's courage inspired you to trust your own instincts, then like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications. Share it with someone who needs to know that their suspicions matter, that their fears are valid, that they have the power to save themselves and others. Drop a comment below telling us what detail you pay attention to that others might miss. Your observation could be the key that saves someone's life. And remember, if something feels wrong, it probably is. Trust yourself. Document everything. And never, ever drink from a glass you didn't fill yourself. Thanks for joining the family. We'll see you in the next story, where ordinary people do extraordinary things when pushed to their limits. Until then, stay vigilant, stay strong, and keep fighting for justice, one small detail at a time.